We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, and I'm a partnerships manager here at AllVoices, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Today, I'm excited to welcome our next guest, Jillian Moulton. She is the Chief of Staff and VP of Human Resources at JW Player. Jillian, how are you doing today?
I am well. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, of course. It's the beginning of the week. If you want to start off by telling us a little bit about you, including your pronouns, and this can be literally anything, but what's recently brought you joy?
Yeah, so my pronouns are she and her. And what's recently brought me joy is I have a 4 and a 2-year-old, and they're starting to play with each other, which is amazing.
That's awesome. And they get along.
For the most part, I mean, as much as a 4 and a 2-year-old can, but yeah, to this point, she's the younger one, has not had really any interest in playing with him. And it's really, now they'll actually laugh at each other, that is the joy, is seeing your kids laugh with each other.
That's amazing. I love that. That's a great answer. I'd love to ask about your journey to JW Player and how your personal journey has really led up to this point to help lead the human resources team. I saw in your bio that you've been there for, around 7 years. So how did that start?
Yeah, my journey is not a common one. So I have my bachelor's degree in journalism, but specifically within advertising. And then I, after school, decided I wanted to be in performance, and I went and got my master's of fine arts in really performance art, I guess you could say. I got that when I was in London, and then I moved to New York and was fully prepared to be a working artist. But I always had a day job in business to kind of, pay the bills, connect everything. And I got a job in New York for a tech company, and that was a financial tech startup. And at the same time, I was doing my work, and I got cast in a production with the New York City Opera. At the time, was really avant-garde opera with dance, and it was crazy. At the same time, this tech company was booming. When I joined them, they were 30, and they were just exploding from growth. I was also getting this opportunity to perform at the Lincoln Center. It was like everything, and I found that I was so much more engaged by the tech startup than I was by the opportunity to perform at Lincoln Center. And I had to come to a reckoning of, there are so many people who would be like, this opportunity at Lincoln Center is what they've always dreamed of. And I'm like totally into the tech thing. So from that point forward, I decided to really commit to doing HR and tech for tech companies. And then I went from that fintech startup to the digital news company Mashable, where I spent 2.5 years. And then I came to JW Player 7 years ago. And I've had an amazing journey there, both being given the opportunity to learn, but also given the opportunity to try things, learn about my industry, get involved, growth, both internationally and domestically. And then the pandemic hit, and I got a whole new lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like you have definitely creative bones, which is awesome. And over this past year, we had to seen a lot of creativity in terms of strategies and employee engagement, and just really meeting people where they are as well. I can only imagine just all of the uncertainty. And I know from these conversations, a lot of folks are coming to HR to solve everything and anything. So I wanted to ask you, how has your employee engagement strategy really changed? And also not only this past year, but what's going to be long lasting in the future?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that that change in the last year, of course, is everybody going remote, of course, made it that we had to put a rigor into our communication. We had to formalize it, where before we might be able to be a little more ad hoc. We had to start building out communication pathways that people can rely on. So we made our all hands weekly. It's 1 hour on Wednesdays, and that has become something people know what's coming, know what the format is, know what communication they're going to get through that. And they also know that that is where you can go to get recognition. So we also built out more formal ways of recognizing people that is more documented, where before it might be a shout out being like, this person did a great job. Now we're like, we have a values ambassador program to shout out somebody who really lived our values in that month. We also rolled out team event budgets to really localize team building within not a regional, like geographical location, but literally within a unit of a team to kind of refound that connection, but also make it, digital. And like our teams today are not all based in New York anymore. They are more broadly spread out. So the identity is more of the team unit than it was the department or even the geographical location.
Got it. So that sounds like there's a lot of just like different options and activities for folks to participate in, whether it's on your team and then on a company-wide level as well with all hands too. And communication during this time especially is so important no matter where you are in the world. For whatever reason, there's so many things going on. People might not be engaged in the workplace. What is your advice for really, re-engaging folks and having that maybe a difficult conversation and really understanding what's keeping them from being like fully present?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that I learned from this process is equity. Equity means more than just like the DEI thing. It literally means an equity of the way people feel empowered to communicate. Before, when we were all in one place, whoever spoke loudest usually dominated. And when we went remote, we actually found people who were more introverted or who didn't feel comfortable to open door policy with a CEO. They found other ways to communicate. And that's a big thing that we don't want to lose when we go back is, anonymous feedback channels were used more for just asking a question that you may not feel comfortable asking in person. Slack was used, to targetedly ask people things, especially for introverts who are not the loudest person in the room, who still have an incredibly valuable opinion. And we found ways to empower them that we did not have before, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like there's a multitude of ways that you can provide that feedback, whether you're comfortable with your manager in doing that, or if you are comfortable but want to provide some anonymous feedback as well, there's an option to do that too. And having an open door policy is always really helpful. How do you see just like a culture of feedback, which is something that we really strongly believe in, and just like employee listening, building that trust, really impacting the organization at large? Why is it important?
It's important because it is what your strategy should be built on. I mean, especially in our company, people are our product in a lot of ways. Yes, we're a software company, but people are what make us work. And people are also what make us better. And if we're missing the voices of certain people in how we're building out that strategy, we're not having our best strategy. So equity has become something that isn't just a DEI thing, it is a operational strategy. We have to do it if we want to be better, faster, quicker, smarter, collaborative, all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how it's not just segmented into diversity, equity, and inclusion is one department, or it's just, it's a team of one or just like a few. It's really everybody looking with that intersectional lens for processes and looking for ways to make it more equitable. Speaking of people as, really helping the product level up and just in terms of a workplace, making the environment better, whether it's virtual or in person, how are you thinking about prioritizing employees, just, mental health during this time? Burnout has been a huge topic of conversation lately, Zoom fatigue as well. What are your thoughts around that?
This was a little bit of a trial and error for us through, I think, the pandemic, going into the pandemic, because a lot of times mental health is not something you could, is happening, or people don't even know themselves. Mm-hmm. So we initially really leaned into, we have an open PTO policy, go and take it. But we found that people were like, even if I take PTO, it's just me going away. My team is still there. All the time zones that we work in are still there. And so what we decided early on is that we decided to pick 2 Fridays out of every month and give them as a global day off. And it has been amazing because people will take it for their mental health. It's really about mental health, but they take it without feeling like somebody else is working and that they'll have a bigger load when they come back. It's like we as a group are doing it together. And some people take the day to do heads down work. It's not in any way mandated, but that's something that some people have found has been actually a really great thing for their mental health, is that they felt like they were always chasing and now they had space to actually get, catch up with themselves. And that's been a huge, I think a huge improvement for our company.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's a ton of research out there around just when people have unlimited PTO, they're like, it's always there, but having company-wide days and knowing, someone might not slack you during that time, whether you decide to do heads down work or spend time doing something outside of that is, is really important. Digging down a little bit deeper into just the identity of employees. We know so many folks are working parents or taking care of aging parents or family members in general. How does JW Player really kind of support caretakers at the company?
Yeah, so funny enough, in the past year and a half, even 2 years, we've had so many additions. We call them additions because there've just been so many that we've added. I think we've added like 10 or 12 babies in the past year and a half. So, it's a combination, I think, of the general age of our staff, but we have more and more parents on board. So I think that is, we couldn't make that one happen, but that has just naturally been a cultural change for us. But we also implemented during the pandemic a caregiver stipend, because we knew that those people who are caregiving not only for children, but also for, elderly or otherwise really are taking on kind of a bigger impact, especially when daycares were closed, schools were closed. It was intense. And I could speak from experience having the daycares closed. So the caregiver stipend is depend on the age and amount of people you're giving a care for, but that was something that we rolled out to really acknowledge that that's a burden that we can't, quick fix. There's not really much we can do other than that.
Absolutely. The time and resources and just money towards something that is, something that a lot of folks are dealing with as well, I think is really important, and seeing what the company can do to support them, I think is a really good idea. I know you mentioned, operationalizing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really thinking about it from that perspective, and folks being DEI champions in their own way, whether they're managers or individual contributors. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of how you and the company thinks about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and your strategy and goals for this year?
Yeah, so this is one area that I think we really came to, the management team specifically, but just our entire organization, of what do we not know that we don't know? And I don't mean to use double negatives, but it really is a feeling that anything we would do would be a really shot in the dark in some ways, and we needed to step back and educate ourselves on what we may not know. And then we also needed to bring someone in who was not one of us to tell us their point of view. So at the end, in Q4 of last year, we brought on a diversity, equity, inclusion consultancy to do a mini assessment of our organization. So they looked at all of our policies, our processes, they did focus groups and one-on-ones with their management team to really do a deeper dive, because we've had DEI initiatives. We have a DEI committee that's very active, almost to the point of exhausting themselves because of their passion for it. But we hadn't seen a lot of improvement, or at least improvement that we wanted to really recognize. So we're doing a 1-year engagement with this consultancy. They've given us the assessment. We're now moving into a strategic plan. And it's funny, the strategic planning, again, feels a lot more like operational planning, because a lot of the things we're talking about are inclusion, formality, standardization, automation that really removes, in systemic bias that we might have, or finding ways to be more equitable for a diversity of voices, and just changing our way that the way that we do things to make them more transparent and also more clear.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those things too, when you're changing processes, you're trying to mitigate bias, are a little bit harder to measure in terms of metrics. And I know so many people are just thinking about how they can measure either their progress or lack thereof progress with their strategic goals. How are you thinking about looking towards those milestones for the company and individuals, just to say, okay, we're doing all of this work, how do we know where we are, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's one thing that we're definitely going to work with the consultancy on, and that's actually part of the strategic planning. Is the end of it, once we decide what we want to do, we'll define how we measure it, because I think traditionally most HR teams are looking at demographics, they're looking at the gender. It's all these traditional almost EEOC things that, in all honesty, are more of they're not telling you leading or lagging. So for us, I think we want to find ways through engagement, through perception, through, our engagement survey is one way that we can get that feedback from our employees, but it's bigger than us. And I'm also like, we have to kind of listen to the industry and the community to also tell us what they find, because I think there is also something happening in the industry of like, what we've used before is really not getting the job done. So how do we change that and, be open to new metrics that might be hard, that might be tough, but actually get us to a better place?
Absolutely. Just like a regular business strategy, if you're launching a new product or, another business unit as well, just seeing what works and what doesn't. And when you're kind of developing the strategy, again, innovating, there's oftentimes, mistakes that happen and you acknowledge it and move on and always do better. So not necessarily at JW Player, but just in the industry in general. Have you seen any kind of common mistakes that folks have made either with their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy or people strategy over the past year? Even myths you want to kind of break, anything like that?
Oh, so many. No. I think for me, the two that immediately kind of like touch me, like have an emotional response for me is making DEI a HR only thing is the quickest way to lack of success as possible and it's hard for me because that was actually a journey for me for a long time. I was like, it is an HR thing because we are the best at it. We should take it on. But I've come to understand that no, it's an organizational thing. It's a management thing. It's an executive thing. HR can only go so far. And if it's all in HR will only go so far and put it to the side. So making it not just HR is essential to actually having any impact or change. And also metrics. This is definitely a tech startup thing, but we're very metrics driven, but metrics can also be, they can be bad. Sometimes, especially if you're just using demographics, gender, engagement survey, these are things that we've used before. So I think finding a better way to look at metrics that is more holistic, I guess, instead of just like these three and we've won the year of diversity, equity, inclusion. That's something I think that has to change. We have to find a new way to think about it holistically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely agree too, in terms of not just checking the box and saying, okay, we hit these 3 goals 6 months in, so the next 6 months, we're not going to focus on this because we already hit these metrics and we're good. We don't need to work on it again until next year or ever. So I definitely agree with you there. I guess on the opposite side too, are there any trends that you're seeing, that you think that individuals or either companies need to really hone in on to be successful in the future as we're building more equitable systems?
It's a good question. I think listening to your teams is important, but your teams are also the result of what you've been doing for the past 5 to 6 years. So how do you listen to the industry and the world? That's the other thing is like every company can only control what they do. It's true. But this topic specifically is massive. It's global, right? It is social, it is economic, it is all of the things. So one company thinking that they can change the world just by changing themselves, I think is going to get us only so far. I think we have to reach out to each other. I love that in the pandemic, there's been a lot of sharing among HR professionals, DEI professionals. There's so many, especially during the BLM in the US, there was tons of knowledge sharing that was so beautiful to see. And I've seen it kind of taper off just because, time and energy, I respect that. But that is the kind of spirit that we need to keep igniting in order to have this change, because it has to be more than just one company. It has to be us all.
Yeah, and there's a lot of power in community as well in terms of people teams, HR teams, but really anyone at organization too, and also working together and not reinventing the wheel. If something is really working and sharing that with others or something didn't work, it definitely saves time as well, and just sharing resources. I'm sure that you have kind of many of these over your past 7 years at JW Player or throughout your career, but do you have a kind of proudest moment, whether it's a big win or a small win, where you're in that moment of flow thinking, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, this is great?
Oh gosh, it's been so up and down. It's funny when you were just talking before, I thought of it as like, it's almost like DEI is like a space race. We need to start sharing with each other. We can't make a Cold War out of this, which is, I don't know if that's the best metaphor. But I think I've been really proud of the way our D&I committee at JW Player, which is completely employee led, have really organized themselves, like and started to build up a consistency, because I think that's really hard, because because any employee resource group is made up of employees, and they come and they go and they flow, and you'll get somebody who's a real project manager, and then you'll have somebody who's a real leader. But I'm really proud of how they've started to formalize themselves so that they can be more resilient to that kind of change. And I should say I don't own that myself. I'm more just in admiration of them stepping forward and doing that formalization. And that's something I would love to share to other employee resource groups out there. Is I know that you're working hard, create formalization so that you have that resilience to turnover.
Absolutely, and scale it and really have an impact. And I think that really says something too when you're empowering others and they feel that they can take initiative and just build out these events or programs or just help lead the company in this way. And I personally love employee resource groups, so I think it's a great way to build a community at a company as well. Is there anything that I kind of didn't ask throughout our conversation that you wanted to share, or just one or two key takeaways that you want our listeners to really take away from our conversation this afternoon?
The only thing I would add is, as we all endeavor to have a really strong feedback culture where you're getting feedback from all sources and making it equitable, that means nothing if you're not actually speaking it back, right? You become a void if you create all these channels, but then you don't have the bandwidth to respond to them in an organized way. And it's not easy, but that's something that I'm kind of proud that JW does, is we attempt all feedback that comes in, if it's relevant and it's something we can act on, we will bring it back, either through individual groups, individual teams, or to the company at large. And I think that loop is essential to continuing to get good feedback coming into your channels. So, yeah.
Yeah, taking that action and also sharing, that you received the feedback and that it didn't just go into a black hole of just feedback for the company, and then you don't have any feedback, and then you're just like, oh, everything is perfect. But everybody always has feedback to share, so that makes sense. Jillian, thank you so much for sharing your personal journey to JW Player and just what you've seen in terms of industry trends and advice for the future. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
And as a reminder for folks who are listening, AllVoices believes in the empowerment of everyone to speak up at an organization and thinks it's a requirement for folks to succeed. We'll see you soon.